In 1831, on a rocky plateau near the Sierra Madre Mountains, Chief Juan José Compa watched as orderly ranks of regular troops approached. He observed the soldiers' heavy march, their cumbersome supply trains, and their strict discipline, trying to understand the logic behind these newcomers. Would the outcome of a long-standing territorial dispute be decided not in open conflict, but in a moment of silence during the first negotiations? Are you ready to learn the truth about how a single encounter changed the fate of the peoples of the southern deserts for many decades to come? Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how this historic encounter allowed the Native Americans to uncover the state army's greatest vulnerability and rethink their tactics. Are you ready for the shocking truth that large-scale historical shifts often begin with the signing of an ordinary document? In 1821, the Mexican Republic gained independence and began establishing a new order in its vast northern territories. For decades, the former Spanish administration had maintained peace with the local peoples through a complex system of distributing food and goods. The new government decided to abolish these costly distributions, deeming them impractical for the young state. This bureaucratic decision instantly disrupted the region's fragile economic balance and forced indigenous communities to seek new ways to provide for their people. At the center of these historic changes were the Chiricahua people, whose lands spanned the mountains of present-day New Mexico and the northern regions of Chihuahua. The leader of one of the largest Membrano communities at that time was Juan José Compa, an outstanding strategist and diplomat. This man possessed a deep understanding of the political situation and regularly served as a negotiator between his people and European administrations. He was well aware that the cancellation of food supplies would inevitably lead to an economic crisis within the community. The chief decided to take preemptive action and attempt to forge new relationships with representatives of the Mexican government. The Chiricahua culture was built on absolute mobility and a deep knowledge of the arid landscape. The communities did not build permanent settlements, but moved along precisely mapped seasonal routes between mountain springs. The loss of a stable external supply meant they had to expand their territories for resource gathering and trade. The Mexican government, by contrast, thought in terms of clear borders, fixed settlements, and strict tax reporting. These two completely different worldviews were bound to clash, either diplomatically or militarily. Juan José Compa stood out among other leaders for his analytical approach to solving emerging problems. He had spent many years studying the habits of Spanish officials and was now trying to understand how representatives of the new republic would act. The chief regularly convened councils of elders, at which possible scenarios were discussed in detail. It was decided to send envoys to the nearest military garrisons to ascertain the intentions of the new authorities. Diplomatic efforts were conducted with the utmost caution, so as not to provoke an unwarranted conflict on the borders of their ancestral lands. The situation was complicated by the fact that Mexican military units had begun patrolling territories that the Chiricahua considered their trade routes. The National Army moved slowly, relying on a network of fortified outposts called presidios. These garrisons served as centers for command and the distribution of resources for the growing number of settlers. The arrival of regular troops disrupted the traditional travel routes of the indigenous communities and posed a threat to their security. Chief Compa realized that it was no longer possible to ignore the presence of this new force. Preparations for the meeting became a significant event for the entire Chiricahua people, uniting various groups in the face of uncertainty. The chief assembled a small but experienced group of advisors, each responsible for a specific aspect of security. They carefully planned the route to the meeting place, leaving escape routes open for a covert retreat. Everyone understood the historical significance of the upcoming dialogue, on which the future of their traditional way of life depended. Tension mounted with each passing day, as the date of official contact drew nearer. Finally, on the appointed day in 1831, a group of Native American diplomats arrived at the agreed-upon meeting place. This event became a turning point that forever altered the balance of power in the southern regions of the continent. The meeting of two different civilizations at the same table promised to be a true test of resilience for both sides. We'd love to hear your thoughts on just how significant these first contacts in history were. Share your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new historical research. Want to know a secret that will completely change your understanding of military logistics in the past? Juan José Compa's group's journey to the negotiation site was a prime example of perfect adaptation to the harsh desert conditions. The group traveled light, without using heavy wagons or complex supply systems. Each member of the delegation carried only the bare minimum of water and nutritious roots. Their pace was incredibly fast, as they followed hidden trails known only to them. The Indians used deep canyons and dry riverbeds to move unnoticed across open terrain. These natural shelters protected them from the scorching sun and concealed them from potential military patrols. Their knowledge of the location of every hidden spring allowed them to avoid relying on major waterways. Chief Compa personally led the group, demonstrating a phenomenal memory for landmarks in the monotonous, rocky landscape. This trek was not merely a journey, but a demonstration of man's complete harmony with the environment. At the same time, the Mexican regular troops under the colonel's command were moving toward the rendezvous point in a completely different manner. Their columns stretched for many kilometers, filling the surroundings with the rumble of wheels and the creaking of heavy wooden axles. The soldiers were forced to cut paths through thickets of brush to clear the way for the heavily laden wagons. The supply train carried tents, provisions, ammunition, and a vast quantity of water in wooden barrels. The Army's rate of advance was determined by the speed of the slowest link in this complex logistical chain. Chiricahua scouts watched the Army's advance from high, rocky ridges, remaining completely invisible. They noted how quickly the soldiers' strength was sapped under the scorching sun due to their heavy woolen uniforms. The column was strictly tied to known water sources, which made its route entirely predictable. Every evening, the Army spent hours setting up a fortified camp, posting sentries, and lighting dozens of campfires. Juan José Compa received these reports daily, forming a clear picture of how the state's military machine operated. On the morning of the appointed day, Mexican buglers sounded the signal, indicating readiness to begin negotiations. The sound of the bugles echoed through the canyons, breaking the familiar silence of the desert lands. Juan José Compa and his entourage descended into the valley calmly and without undue haste. Their appearance seemed sudden, as if they had materialized directly from the scorching air above the rocks. The soldiers in formation watched in surprise, as these men, who had no supply trains, appeared full of energy. The venue for the negotiations was a large tent set up in the center of the Army camp. Ranks of soldiers in full uniform were lined up around the tent, demonstrating the military might of the young republic. The Native American delegation walked through these ranks with complete composure, carefully noting every detail of the soldiers' equipment. Chief Compa immediately noticed how cumbersome the soldiers were in their heavy clothing and with their heavy weapons. These observations would later form the basis for the development of an entirely new military doctrine for nomadic peoples. The parties took their seats at a wooden table, symbolizing the start of the official diplomatic process. On one side sat Mexican officers with maps, documents, and writing materials. On the other side sat the Chiricahua leaders, whose primary documents were the collective memory of generations and their knowledge of their homeland. A heavy silence hung in the tent, foreshadowing a complex and lengthy discussion about the region's future. Every word spoken in the upcoming conversation could determine the fate of thousands of people for many years to come. This meeting laid the foundation for understanding the profound differences between the two worldviews. Tension hung in the air, and both sides realized that their usual methods of communication no longer worked. Chief Compa was preparing to speak in defense of his community's interests. But how exactly did this historic dialogue unfold? And why did it reach a logical impasse? In the next chapter, you'll learn exactly which demands left the representatives of the Mexican command completely baffled. The hidden truth that many keep silent about is that during the negotiations, the parties literally did not understand the essence of each other's demands. The Mexican colonel began the meeting by unfolding a large paper map on which straight lines had been drawn. He declared that the government of the Republic was establishing new borders and requiring indigenous communities to remain within strictly designated zones. To Juan José Compa, the very concept of dividing a single land with artificial lines on paper seemed utterly devoid of practical meaning. The land belonged to those who knew how to survive on it, not to those who had simply drawn it on parchment. The officers insisted that the Indians recognize the authority of the new law and cease any unauthorized movements. In exchange, they promised to resume some food supplies, but only at designated distribution points. The chief listened intently to the interpreter, noting the harshness and categorical nature of the ultimatums being presented. He replied in a calm and even voice, explaining that mountains and valleys could not be divided by decrees issued from afar. His people followed the seasons, water sources, and the migrations of game herds, the very foundation of their centuries-old way of life. The diplomatic impasse became apparent when the discussion turned to control over trade routes in the region. The army command demanded that the Chiricahua cease all contact with independent traders and surrender all surplus goods to government commissioners. For the Chiricahua, free trade was a vital mechanism for exchanging resources among various remote communities. Complying with these demands would mean a complete loss of economic independence and a slow decline within the designated boundaries. Juan José Compa understood that signing such a treaty would be tantamount to voluntarily surrendering his people's freedom. The chief attempted to explain to the Mexican representatives that security in the region depended not on the number of soldiers, but on mutual respect. He proposed a treaty based on free passage and the resumption of traditional trade without the mediation of military garrisons. The colonel interpreted this proposal as insolence and a refusal to submit to legitimate state authority. The officers were accustomed to giving orders and expected unquestioning obedience from those they considered disorganized nomads. They did not see before them experienced diplomats capable of thinking in complex strategic terms. At that moment, Juan José Compa made a crucial observation that would forever change the course of history. He noticed that the officers' entire confidence was based solely on the presence of a massive camp and hundreds of soldiers outside the tent. They felt safe only within this artificial fortress, made up of tents and wagons. As soon as the army left this camp and headed into the mountains, their paper laws would lose all power. The chief realized that the power of the state was illusory and functioned only as far as a heavy supply wagon could travel. The negotiations lasted several hours, turning into an endless exchange of impossible demands. The Mexican side threatened to use military force if the proposed documents were not signed. Upon returning to the mountains, Juan José Compa convened a council of elders to announce the results of the historic meeting. The council gathered in a deep canyon, hidden from the prying eyes of outsiders. The chief described in detail everything he had seen at the camp, from the paper maps to the organization of the army supply trains. He spoke calmly and confidently, conveying to everyone present his new understanding of the situation. The elders listened in complete silence, realizing that the old world was irrevocably fading into the past. It was at this very council that the idea was formulated, which would form the basis of a new philosophy of resistance. The chief presented his conclusions as clearly as possible, shattering the myth of the invincibility of regular troops. The elders realized that their main ally in the coming conflict would be the harshness of nature itself. This unique strategy would be passed down from generation to generation, ensuring the survival of the people. Please like this video if you enjoy learning about the intricacies of historical diplomacy. What if everything soldiers were taught in military academies became obsolete the very moment they set foot on New Mexico soil? The regular army was built on the concept of a general battle, where the side with greater firepower and stricter discipline wins. Commanders were accustomed to lining up their men in even ranks and exchanging volleys until one side was completely routed. Juan José Compa explained to the Council of Elders that they must never accept these rules of the game. If the army seeks open combat, the task of the nomadic communities is to ensure that such a battle never takes place. The chief analyzed the structure of the Mexican military camp in detail, paying particular attention to the supply system. He pointed out that the soldiers were unable to find food in the desert and were completely dependent on their creaking wagons. Without a regular supply of water and provisions, this formidable force would turn into a crowd of exhausted people in a matter of days. Consequently, the primary target for any potential attacks should not be the armed units themselves, but their supply lines. Destroying a single supply train inflicts greater damage on the state than a victory in open combat. As part of the new strategy, control over fresh water sources took on particular importance. The chief ordered the drafting of detailed retreat routes that included only hidden springs unknown to cartographers. Military patrols pursuing mobile groups inevitably found themselves cut off from their water supply. The Indians could calmly watch as thirst forced the officers to abandon the pursuit and return to their forts. Water became not merely a condition for survival, but a true tactical tool in the hands of skilled commanders. Implementing this plan required the utmost discipline from every member of the community. Movement had to be completely silent, leaving no deep tracks in the soft ground. The use of fire was strictly regulated so that the smoke from campfires would not reveal the location of temporary camps. Even the method of long-distance communication was altered. Instead of loud sounds, they used reflections from mirrors and pre-arranged signals. The community transformed into a single, well-coordinated mechanism geared toward an invisible confrontation. This historic transformation took several months of meticulous preparation and training of the youth. Juan José Compa personally verified the readiness of various groups to operate under the constant presence of the military. He understood that the slightest mistake could lead to tragic consequences for entire families. The result of these efforts was a system that was decades ahead of the concepts of asymmetric warfare. Regular troops were confronted with a phenomenon they could neither describe in their manuals nor defeat on the battlefield. Soon, the Mexican command began to realize that their ultimatums were being completely ignored. Diplomatic missions returned empty-handed, and attempts to establish control over the territories failed. Patrols ventured into the mountains and returned exhausted, having never encountered a single enemy. The region's economy began to stagnate due to constant uncertainty and the inability to secure trade routes. The government proved powerless against the strategy of absolute invisibility. The realization of their own powerlessness led officers to make one tactical mistake after another. They dispatched massive convoys to guard a negligible amount of cargo, draining the army's budgets. How long could the regular army withstand such invisible pressure without losing control of the region? In the next chapter, you'll learn how these changes affected daily life in the military garrisons in the desert. The shift in the initiative to the nomadic communities radically changed the situation around the Mexican presidios. The garrisons, which were originally conceived as centers of control over the territories, turned into isolated islands. Soldiers were afraid to venture beyond the fortress walls without the escort of a large armed convoy. Every trip to fetch firewood or drinking water turned into a complex and dangerous military operation. The infrastructure of the fortifications began to gradually fall into disrepair due to constant strain and a shortage of resources. Supplying the forts became a veritable logistical nightmare for the Army Command. Convoys carrying food had to travel enormous distances across open, exposed terrain. Groups of Chiricahua scouts monitored every convoy leaving major cities and relayed the information along the route. Attacks occurred in the most impassable areas, where the escort could not quickly form a defensive line. As a result, the forts received only a small fraction of the supplies sent, leading to chronic shortages. Officers attempted to address this problem by increasing the number of guards for each convoy. However, this only exacerbated the situation, as the additional soldiers required even more water and food along the way. The heavy supply trains moved incredibly slowly, becoming easy targets for the exhausting tactic of constant harassment. The Indians could follow a parallel course for hours without engaging in combat, yet forcing the escort to remain on high alert. The soldiers' morale reached a critical low even before they arrived at their destination. Juan José Compa and other leaders strictly enforced the rule against engaging in protracted firefights. The main objective was to force the convoy to abandon its wagons and retreat to the cover of the nearest garrison. As soon as the soldiers withdrew, the wagons were immediately stripped of their cargo and burned to the ground. Weapons, fabrics, and tools were quickly distributed among family groups and hidden in secret caches. This system of self-sufficiency worked flawlessly, turning government logistics into a source of resources for the nomads. The Presidio's isolation from information became yet another powerful weapon in the hands of the Native American strategists. Messengers carrying orders and reports were intercepted on narrow mountain trails, severing communication between garrisons. Fort commanders went for weeks without knowing what was happening at neighboring forts and were unable to coordinate joint actions. The lack of reliable information fueled rumors and panic among garrison soldiers and local residents. Juan José Compa skillfully exploited this situation to strengthen his people's diplomatic position. He periodically sent envoys to the forts with offers of local truces in exchange for goods. Exhausted garrison commanders often agreed to these unofficial deals in violation of orders from the high command. Such agreements allowed the Native Americans to obtain necessary resources without the risk of open conflict. Formally, authority belonged to the Republic, but in reality, the Chiricahua leaders dictated the rules of the game. This unique situation demonstrated the futility of attempts to impose a rigid state structure on a mobile society. Traditional methods of warfare proved utterly powerless against a deep understanding of the enemy's geography and psychology. The desert ceased to be merely a backdrop for historical events becoming a key player in the conflict. The army tried to subdue the land, while the Native Americans exploited its features to their advantage. The outcome of this approach became evident even to the most stubborn officials in the capital. However, the tension could not persist indefinitely without attempts to resolve the crisis through radical measures. The Mexican authorities began to devise new, more aggressive plans to regain control of the northern borders. The command decided to abandon passive defense tactics and prepare a large-scale expedition deep into the mountains. This change in government policy inevitably led to a new phase of open confrontation in the region. The denouement of the first phase of the conflict was approaching with inexorable inevitability. This secret, passed down from generation to generation, confirms the ancient principle that every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. The loss of control over the vital northern provinces caused serious alarm in the capital of the Mexican Republic. The government realized that the tactic of relying on isolated presidios had completely failed and required immediate revision. Additional funds were allocated to equip special mobile units capable of operating independently of their bases. The command decided to launch an attack on the suspected permanent encampments deep within the mountain range. The new units were formed from local residents who were well acquainted with the harsh climate and the terrain. These units were spared the need to haul heavy supply trains and moved much faster. Their mission was not to engage in open combat, but to locate hidden camps and destroy food supplies. The army began to adopt certain elements of its opponent's tactics, attempting to deprive them of their main advantage, mobility. This move marked the transition of the conflict into a completely new phase, one that was more dangerous for both sides. Juan José Compa and his scouts quickly noticed changes in the behavior of government troops. The appearance of fast cavalry units, operating without their usual noise, posed a serious threat to small family groups. The chief ordered increased surveillance on all approaches to the mountains and extended patrol ranges. The early warning system was improved. Mirrored signals were relayed through a chain of observation posts in a matter of minutes. The Indians were forced to constantly change their encampment locations to avoid sudden detection by the new patrols. It was decided to use diplomacy as a tool to temporarily ease tensions in the region. The chief's envoys once again set out for the Presidio de Llanos, with proposals to resume trade and end the raids. The Mexican command, also weary of the endless pursuit through the mountains, showed a willingness to engage in dialogue. Both sides understood that, given the geographical conditions, there was no military solution to the problem. A new round of complex negotiations began, aimed at achieving a fragile balance of interests. The experience of the first meeting allowed the indigenous diplomats to adopt a more effective strategy at the negotiating table. They no longer tried to argue over drawn-on-a-map borders, but focused on practical issues of resource exchange. The treaty provided indigenous communities with the right to receive food in exchange for guarantees of road safety. It was a compromise that formally preserved the government's dignity, but effectively recognized the Native Americans' rights to their lands. The ration system, which had been abolished a decade earlier, was partially reinstated under pressure from the circumstances. The conclusion of this agreement was a personal victory for Juan José Compa and proof of the effectiveness of his strategy. He managed to protect his people from outright military annihilation and secured vital resources for them. Flexible thinking and the ability to adapt to changing conditions allowed the community to survive a difficult period. This experience served as an important lesson for future generations of leaders, demonstrating the power of diplomacy backed by tactical advantage. A period of relative peace returned to the scorched lands of New Mexico. However, history does not stand still, and any treaties can be violated by new political ambitions. How long did this fragile balance last? And what new leaders replaced the old diplomats? In the next chapter, you will learn how the generational shift influenced the region's future. The compromise reached ensured several years of relative calm in the Republic's border territories. Indigenous communities were able to regain their strength and return to their traditional seasonal migration cycle. Mexican settlers resumed trade and began reclaiming abandoned farms near major forts. Juan José Compa continued to serve as the primary stabilizing force in relations, meeting regularly with military officials. His authority was recognized both among the indigenous peoples and in the government offices of Chihuahua. However, during this period, a new generation of leaders began to emerge, who viewed the world differently. Among them stood out a man of immense stature and incredible physical strength, who went down in history as Mangas Coloradas. He closely observed the diplomatic efforts of the older chiefs, but did not share their faith in the reliability of government treaties. Mangas Coloradas believed that any concessions to the authorities would only delay the inevitable clash for complete control over the land. His views found increasing support among young warriors, who were tired of constant compromises. Mangas Coloradas took it upon himself to unite the scattered Membreno groups into a single front. He possessed not only physical strength, but also an outstanding strategic mind, capable of thinking on a grand scale. The new chief rejected any attempts to negotiate with representatives of the Mexican administration. His goal was the complete expulsion of government structures and settlers from his people's ancestral lands. To achieve this goal, he began to employ tactics developed by his predecessors, but on a much larger scale. Under the leadership of Mangas Coloradas, isolated attacks on supply convoys turned into a systematic campaign to destroy logistics. The Indians methodically destroyed the Presidio's infrastructure, cut off roads, and blocked access to the mines. Nomadic groups operated with incredible coordination, striking simultaneously in different parts of the vast region. The Mexican army proved utterly incapable of countering this massive and well-organized guerrilla war. The state began to rapidly lose control over the northern territories. This campaign demonstrated how accumulated knowledge and observations were transformed into overwhelming military power. The conclusions drawn by Juan José Compa during his first encounter with the army now worked toward the complete destruction of the enemy. Knowledge of the regular troops' vulnerabilities allowed Mangas Coloradas to paralyze the economies of entire Mexican states. Vast territories returned to the full control of the indigenous peoples, who established their own rules for movement and trade. This was the period of the Chiricahua community's greatest power in the 19th century. The shift in strategy from cautious diplomacy to total guerrilla warfare proved a complete success. History has shown that understanding the enemy's weaknesses is more important than numerical superiority or the thickness of fortress walls. How long did Mangas Coloradas hold power over this harsh region, and what challenges did he face? The answer to this question lies in the global political changes that were looming from the north. Having established his authority, Mangas Coloradas set about creating an unprecedented alliance of the region's nomadic peoples. He understood that to retain control of the territories in the long term, it was necessary to unite the efforts of various, often hostile groups. The chief proved himself a brilliant diplomat within the Native American world by arranging strategic marriages for his daughters. These alliances linked the Membrenos with other influential branches of the Chiricahuas, and even with powerful Navajo leaders. A powerful coalition emerged, capable of coordinating military operations across a vast area stretching from Arizona to Sonora. The new coalition's primary goal was the permanent expulsion of Mexican military forces and miners from their ancestral lands. Particular attention was paid to blocking access to the Santa Rita copper mining district, which had always attracted colonists. The Native Americans cut off all supply routes to the settlement, methodically destroying any transport carrying provisions. The siege was so tight and effective that the colonists and their guards found themselves on the brink of starvation. Soon, the garrison and settlers were forced to abandon the mines for good, leaving them to the rightful owners of the mountains. Mangas Coloradas' military tactics were characterized by ruthless pragmatism and precise calculation of resources. He strictly forbade his warriors from engaging in direct combat unless there was an absolute guarantee of success without casualties. The life of every community member was valued immeasurably higher than any potential military glory or captured booty. This philosophy of preserving lives allowed the coalition to wage a continuous war of attrition against the enemy for decades. Government armies, accustomed to writing off soldier casualties as an inevitability, could not adapt to such logic. The Indians' ability to organize themselves and engage in strategic planning came as a real revelation to Mexican officials. Officials in the capital long refused to believe that illiterate nomads were capable of paralyzing the actions of career generals. They continued to send out new expeditions, which invariably ended in the loss of supply trains and an inglorious retreat. The intellectual superiority of the Chiricahua leaders in matters of tactics and geography was undeniable. The desert showed no mercy to those who tried to impose their theoretical laws upon it. However, a new, far more powerful force was already looming on the horizon, one capable of altering the balance of power on the continent. American explorers and military detachments began appearing with increasing frequency on the northern borders of the disputed territories. They brought with them entirely new technologies, more advanced weapons, and incredible ambitions to settle the West. Mangas Coloradas closely monitored the advance of these newcomers, assessing their potential. He understood that a clash with this growing empire would require a re-evaluation of all existing military strategies. In the mid-1840s, war broke out between the United States and Mexico. This war permanently redrew the political map of the region, transferring vast territories under Washington's jurisdiction. Native American leaders found themselves facing a new administration that possessed incomparably greater resources than its predecessor. The era of the telegraph, railroads, and mass migration of settlers to the Western territories was dawning. Old methods of resistance were about to face a severe test under the pressure of industrialization. How did Mangas Coloradas react to the arrival of the U.S. Army, and was he able to apply his experience against this new enemy? The next chapter will reveal the details of the first contacts with representatives of the United States of America. The arrival of the U.S. Army in New Mexico in 1846 marked a completely new chapter in the region's history. The troops advanced westward quickly and in an orderly fashion, demonstrating a high level of military discipline. Mangas Coloradas and his advisors closely observed these columns of soldiers in blue uniforms. They noted the superior quality of their weapons, the abundance of transportation, and the well-coordinated logistics of the new army. The Americans appeared to be a far more dangerous opponent than the Mexican garrisons, which had been worn down by decades of guerrilla warfare. Initially, the Chiricahua leaders decided to adopt a policy of neutrality toward the arriving American forces. Moreover, Mangas Coloradas even met with American officers, offering them a peace agreement on his own lands. The chief hoped that the new rulers would recognize his people's rights to the land and would not interfere in internal affairs. American generals willingly accepted guarantees of safety for their convoys, but were in no hurry to conclude formal treaties on borders. This diplomatic maneuvering made it possible to avoid direct clashes during the early stages of territorial development. However, the period of peaceful coexistence proved short-lived due to the rapid influx of gold prospectors and settlers. The discovery of gold deposits in California triggered a mass migration across traditional Native American lands. Thousands of wagons rushed along the established trails, depleting the few water sources and damaging the natural environment. The U.S. government began building new forts to protect this endless stream of settlers from any threats. The infrastructure of the new empire inexorably encroached upon the space that Native Americans considered their home. A conflict of interests became inevitable when the new settlers began to seize the most fertile valleys and mountain mines. Mangas Coloradas attempted to resolve the disputes peacefully, drawing on his immense authority and negotiating skills. He pointed out to American officials that it was unacceptable to destroy the desert's fragile ecosystem with heavy wagons and permanent encampments. But officials in Washington thought in terms of industrial development and had no intention of taking the interests of nomadic communities into account. The chief's diplomatic efforts hit a brick wall of bureaucratic indifference and greed. Realizing that a negotiated settlement was impossible, the Native American coalition was forced to resume its tactics of sabotaging supply routes. This time, the targets were stagecoaches, telegraph lines, and supply convoys carrying mining equipment. The new war proved far more difficult than the previous one, as the U.S. Army had unlimited reserves. 2 new supply trains immediately replaced any that were destroyed, and a more heavily fortified fort was built in place of any that had been abandoned. The U.S. government machine operated with industrial inevitability, methodically tightening the noose around the nomadic communities. Nevertheless, the lessons learned during the conflict with the Mexican generals continued to bear fruit. The American cavalry faced the same problems: the slowness of the supply trains, unfamiliarity with the terrain, and dependence on water. The Native Americans remained unrivaled masters of camouflage and surprise attacks in narrow canyons. They forced the army to spend enormous resources guarding every kilometer of postal and transportation routes. The conflict dragged on for many years, becoming one of the most complex military campaigns in history. Mangas Coloradas led this resistance into his twilight years, remaining a symbol of his people's unyielding will. He personally participated in planning maneuvers and continued to coordinate the actions of scattered groups across a vast territory. His name struck fear into the hearts of settlers and commanded deep respect from the cavalry officers who sought to capture him. the chief proved that a well-crafted strategy could offset the technological superiority of even the most powerful industrial army of his time. His life became an example of absolute devotion to his people and their traditional way of life. The strategy of invisible warfare, which had emerged during the first encounters in the early 1930s, had reached its pinnacle. Regular troops were forced to rewrite their tactical manuals in order to somehow counter the mobile guerrilla groups. Generals realized that conventional formations were useless in the mountains and began to create special units of trackers. These units adopted Native American methods of survival and navigation, recognizing their effectiveness. The state's military science was enriched by the experience of those it had sought to subjugate. This historical process demonstrates how the clash of different ways of thinking leads to mutual transformation. The Army learned to operate in the desert, while the Native Americans refined their skills in long-distance coordination. The land where these events unfolded absorbed the experience and knowledge of both sides of the conflict. The long journey from the first negotiations to a full-scale industrial confrontation forever changed the face of the American South. But what was the final chapter in the fate of the great chief who stood at the origins of this strategy? This long journey from the first negotiations to a large-scale confrontation forever changed the face of the American continent. For many decades, Native American leaders held on to their lands, drawing on the knowledge passed down by their predecessors at the turn of the century. Their military philosophy became the subject of careful study in the headquarters of regular armies around the world. But what was the final chapter in the life of the great chief who stood at the origins of this massive resistance? In the next chapter, we will trace the final days of Mangas Coloradas and assess the historical legacy of his decisions. Mangas Coloradas' journey was drawing to its tragic yet inevitable conclusion amid the conditions of total war. By the early 1860s, the chief was already an elderly man who had survived countless battles and lost many comrades. The U.S. Army, despite the outbreak of the Civil War, continued to methodically tighten its control over the territories of New Mexico. Winters were becoming increasingly harsh as the ring of forts closed in, cutting off the Indians' access to their traditional winter camps in the valleys. The Chiricahua people were on the verge of exhaustion, demanding new political decisions from their leader. Realizing the critical situation facing his people, the chief made a decision worthy of a true statesman. He resolved to sacrifice his own safety and go directly to negotiate with the American military command. It was a step born of desperation and at the same time of the utmost courage, as he fully understood the extent of the risk. Mangas Coloradas hoped that his personal authority would allow him to secure at least a temporary truce to save the community. In 1863, he arrived at the military camp under the banner of a truce, placing his trust in the officer's honor. However, the days of noble diplomacy were irrevocably gone, having given way to the brutal pragmatism of a war of attrition. The American commander ignored the truce flag and ordered the elderly chief to be arrested immediately. Mangas Coloradas was disarmed and placed under strict guard, finding himself a prisoner of the very people he had come to negotiate with. This treacherous violation of the unwritten laws of honor shocked even some of the American officers present at the arrest. The chief accepted his fate with incredible dignity, uttering not a single word of complaint or plea for mercy. That very night, the life of the great strategist and diplomat came to a tragic end within the walls of the military camp. The guards eliminated the captive chief, violating every conceivable rule of fair negotiation. The death of Mangas Colorado became a symbol of the final collapse of any attempts to find a compromise between the two civilizations. Upon learning of the betrayal, the Native American communities abandoned further attempts at a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. War flared up with new, unprecedented intensity, plunging the region into chaos for many years to come. This story vividly demonstrates how the clash of different ways of thinking shapes the course of history. An army that thought in terms of straight lines and orders came up against people who thought in terms of space and survival. Victory in this struggle was possible only by altering the enemy's very environment, which is ultimately what happened. The construction of railroads and the destruction of food sources achieved what the generals had failed to accomplish on the open battlefield. Infrastructure triumphed over mobility, but the cost of this victory was enormous for both sides. The memory of the great Chiricahua leaders lives on today in the names of canyons, mountains, and rivers in the American Southwest. Their tactical legacy serves as a reminder that a failure to understand the enemy's logic always leads to catastrophic consequences. The story of Mangas Coloradas and Juan José Compa teaches us to respect other cultures and different ways of perceiving the world. Their life story is not merely a chronicle of military maneuvers, but a complex intellectual duel with an entire state apparatus. They lost their lands, but their tactical genius remains recognized in the pages of history. The chief's gaze upon the ranks of soldiers back in 1831 became the spark that ignited the flame of a brilliant strategy. They turned the land itself into their primary weapon, forcing the outsiders to battle against rocks, thirst, and the sun. This absolute harmony between man and the harsh natural environment became an insurmountable barrier to imperial ambitions for many decades. The history of the Wild West is often described as mere expansion, but behind this facade lies the incredible drama of a battle of wits. The Desert Indians have forever inscribed their names in the world history of military art. We have traced the long and complex path of the development of unique military and diplomatic thought through the examples of specific historical figures. This analysis demonstrates just how multifaceted and profound the history of confrontation on the American continent was. Understanding these processes helps us better appreciate the price paid by these peoples in shaping the modern world. We hope this study has allowed you to view well-known events from a completely new perspective. Even more exciting discoveries await us in the labyrinths of the past. In conclusion, we would like to note that the tactics and diplomacy of the nomadic peoples of the Southwest constituted a highly sophisticated system of survival. The journey of the Chiricahua leaders, from their first attempts at peaceful dialogue to their desperate resistance against the industrial empire, demonstrates the incredible strength of the human spirit. They prove that a deep understanding of the laws of nature and the enemy's psychology can halt entire armies for decades. What other historical events or cultures do you think deserve a detailed analysis in our future videos? Be sure to suggest your own topics in the comments and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to uncover the hidden chapters of history together.